The Mazda MX-30 electric vehicle. When they launched this in Europe last year in 2020, I had some serious reservations. They took the older internal combustion architecture or platform, they reskinned it and added a battery pack to it and an electric motor stuck in the front half of the car. Now they have launched it in North America, specifically the United States, as a California-only electric car. It contains a 35.5 kilowatt-hour battery that is good for 100 miles of range. And on a regular 120-volt outlet will take over half a day to charge. For a level 2 charger, 240 volts, it will take you roughly 3 hours to charge it. So you essentially need a level 3 charger if you're putting a lot of miles on this. Now, the difference is I went to the launch of this. I went to California to talk to Mazda North America about what they were trying to do. And I've also had to go back and learn a little bit from the Japanese and European side, or at least their design studios, to figure out a little bit about how this was made, what their mindset was, and what it's trying to be.
知らされて、九州工業大学というところで制御システム工学を専攻してまいりました。自動車会社に就職しようと思ったのは大学卒業間際なんですけれども、学生時代はしばらくの間自転車で大学に通っていました。大学4年生になって自分の車っていうのを持って、その途端に自分自身の行動半径も広がりましたし、本当に多くの人との出会い、新しい出会いっていうのをこの1台の車でそういう世界が広がるんだなっていう特 A ランクというライセンスを取得しています。そうですね、私自身やはりテストドライバーをやっててよかったなと思うことが大きく2つあります。それはこの MX-30 というモデルがグローバルなモデルであったということで、社内それから社外の多くのメンバーに助けられたこと、そして私自身テストドライバーを経験していましたので MX-30 の性能をどうしたいとか、そういった性能を自分の言葉で表すことができたということでは全てのことを細かく知っているわけではありませんので、メンバー一人一人が持っているその知識であるとか経験、こういったものをいかにチャレンジ、私にとってMX-30 の誇りは何といってもチームメンバーです。通常の開発期間よりも MX-30 長めに開発期間かかっています。その間諦めることなく MX-30 の量産化に向けて取り組んでくれたチームメンバーこそが私にとっての誇りです。MX-30 のコンセプトは自然体です。お客様が多いと思います。お客様が MX-30 を見て、そして触れて乗り込んでいただくことによって心が整えられる時間と空間を感じていただきたいというふうに思っています。お客様の心が整えられた状態でぜひ MX-30 の純粋な走りをお楽しみいただければというふうに考えています。
Now, not every car has a story, but for some reason the MX-30 had me captivated, as flawed as it is. I sat down with Jay, who is the powertrain manager, and Simona, who did some of the interior design for the MX-30. And the overall story that I got from this was Mazda. They needed to go in a new direction. They need to have a plan in place to evolve electrification. Whether you believe in it or not, this is something they have to do as a brand. And it's difficult because on one hand, they had to take an existing product and scale it out in a way to make this work. So the biggest question is, why doesn't it have more of a range? Why didn't they make this with more power? Why couldn't it have been this and that? And the long story short is taking this existing platform and adding batteries to it, something that wasn't designed to be a pure EV first. They could only fit a finite amount of battery cells in this car at this time to make it all work. So it's really maxed out with as much battery as they can, and that's why it only has the 100-mile range. The other part was they were having to develop a lot of things from the ground up, adding an electric motor, and then programming all that, because when you get to the EV design or EV design compared to internal combustion, it is all electronics. brake-by-wire. The throttle pedal is no longer connected to anything except all your control units. So all of this tuning is much different, and they're still trying to bake some of the Mazda DNA into the experience. Now, one of the biggest things I understood talking with Simona is they were trying to create a unique experience on the inside and the outside. And despite what you think about the exterior styling, and of course all the unpainted black plastic, which we saw in the CX-30, they shrunk the grille down. They tried to make the proportions a bit more clean. The interior space is far more warm and open and just different. And that's by design. They knew that the EV buying public, or the younger generation that was looking at this, wanted a little bit of that sustainability baked in. They didn't want leathers, they didn't want some of the traditional textures, and they definitely did not want a high contrast glossy black plastic. And that was her big push, was not to have that in there because it didn't fit the feeling look of this cabin. But the idea was to get in, to want to look at it, to be interested by it, touch things, feel it, and know that this had a lot of thought put into it. And not only that, once you were over that, when you're driving it, when you're using it, everything had to be usable. We're going to talk about the interior design because this is a deviation from what Mazda has started to do on the CX-30 and the Mazda 3. Now, because Mazda is approaching a younger buying demographic, somebody that is looking for their first electric car, they've taken some liberties in doing some interesting details on this space, including recycled materials to a certain extent, the use of cork and different types of cork, because it's a throwback to Mazda Japan back in the early days where they manufactured that product for certain things. So they've put it in strategic locations. It's in all the storage spots, which is great because there's anti-slip properties to it, and it's behind the door handles. So it's this clever use of it. It looks unique. They call the darker interior vintage, even though it's just a marketing term. But again, when you look at the door panels and you look at where they've put these alt materials, including the seats, it does feel vastly more creative and different. And again, this EV segment has allowed them to think outside the box. They don't have to do the same thing that they're doing and being stuck to that same corporate brand identity that so many manufacturers are doing, and it's much better for it. The seats are extraordinarily comfortable, although they are a bit narrow because my shoulders are so wide I could pick up a building. The door pockets are pretty good. They hold a larger bottle. Really, all the storage is pretty thought out, with the exception of the armrest. It does move forward and back, which is good, but it also impedes your cup holder space. So every time you want to get to your cup, you have to move this armrest back. Some of the same details are here from the Mazda 3 and CX-30. This is built on the Mazda 3 and CX-30 architecture, so you're not going to see night and day differences. The MMI, or infotainment, is the same. The only major change is the HVAC controls have gone to a touchscreen, and they did this because, well, it's the EV market. People expect more screens, apparently. But they did leave physical controls for like auto, the up and down temperature, the defroster, and on and off. So it is a good balance. Now, in terms of space, when the front seats are all the way back, you feel like you're swimming in the front. But in the back seats, you're a little bit more cramped. It's a quiet space, and you can thank some of the material choice. Again, the seats. This hybrid fabric and leatherette that is on here, and it's also kind of carries over into the back seats, there is this sense of calmness, and that's what they were trying to do from a design perspective. They wanted to give you this peaceful element, and despite it being a smaller cabin, there's less glass in here, and you notice it driving, but because of, at least in the brighter color interior, it doesn't feel as much of a coffin-like space. Now, when we get to the back hatch, you can notice that I can fit one large luggage and then I have to put the seats down. So again, this is really for somebody that is in a highly urbanized area like the suburbs or the city. You're not going to be going on enormous trips, and large part the range is going to make sure that you're not going out of town all that often. But I think the main things that it does well is it gives you a good mix of technology and features for the price. If you remove the EV part, this is a highly functional cabin free of a majority of gimmicks that brands like VW are trying to throw in, like on the ID4. It feels like a normal product, and I think that's what people are going to like. But we're going to take this out on the road, we're going to drive, and we're pretty much going to have an argument about why this exists.
back in a Miata, Mark?
No, we're not in a Miata, Jack. This is the MX-30, Mazda's first North American electric car. See how it gets off the line.
I'm really feeling that jerk moment, Mark.
There's no jerk moment. It's just smooth as butter. It's as smooth as a Michael McDonald backing vocal on one of my patented albums I'm making.
Are you going to pair up with Kenny Loggins finally?
I can't afford them. So what we'll have to do is talk about the MX-30 instead. And what you're going to notice, they're trying to, this is a proof of concept. This car is an entire proof of concept that Mazda can build an EV. It's also a bridge to the next generation products. So we know this is built on the CX-30 and Mazda 3 architecture, so it is not a pure EV type vehicle. They've had to alter it. It's totally compromised to get them to this next step.
And you're stuck with 100 miles of range.
Correct. So let's get into some of the things they've done to bridge the gap. They've added some augmented sound to it, so it just doesn't sound like nothing. And why did they add this tone?
So not only is it supposed to give you a stronger emotional response, they are trying to make sure you know that you are going fast, because based upon their studies, if you strip away all of this augmented noise, if you're driving down the highway and you're not staring at the speedometer, you won't really be able to tell, or there's not a good way for you to be able to tell how fast you're going. It's more of a safety thing.
And it is some emotional connection, because your brain associates driving with some type of noise, like whether it's the Jetson sound for EVs or like an engine sound. And it's somewhere in the middle, and I found that it's not annoying at all. So the next thing is really engineering, Jack. What do you really want to say about that?
So you're based on the same suspension architecture as the CX-30, which is totally fine. They have now changed what their GVC is called. They had basic GVC, their first iteration of it, which cut a little bit of torque to simulate trail braking as you went into an apex of a corner. Then they went to GVC Plus, which had the same cut of torque, but then they added a brake torque vectoring system. Basically,
it's not torque vectoring.
Not torque vectoring, but
just
they were
adding brake, dragging the brake to help you turn in, which they couldn't do originally on the first system because the microprocessor controls that they were using were not fast enough to integrate those two together.
And now with eGVC, they added the third stage of it, so they can now pull torque away faster, but then add a very small, minute amount of acceleration as you leave a corner to help you pull out of that corner a little bit more naturally.
And it's all about reducing jerky inputs in steering.
Yeah.
It's supposed to, for the normal driver, help the car get into a corner and get it out smoother without making micro corrections that upset the vehicle. That was the whole concept of GVC when it was created, and now they continue to evolve it here. So what else do we have? What's the elephant in the room here, Jack?
So it's a mix. This is a really, really competitive segment now. This is where brands like Volkswagen, Hyundai, Mini, and you have, of course, Tesla, the big dog.
Everybody's trying to create an affordable EV.
And you have very little range with this product. You have about 100 miles, if that. You do not have a very powerful power plant, no pun intended. You're looking at like 150-ish horsepower. So it's not particularly quick. Yes, you have a lot of instant gratification when it comes to the way torque is delivered, but it's nowhere as fast as its other EV competitors. So you have to go into this day one knowing you are buying a product meant for a very, very niche city buying market. So if you're in a different country or you don't live where we do in the Midwest, you might be able to swallow that. But, you know.
And this is a California first car, which leads me to believe that not only that, this was to meet certain regulations by having some type of electrification product in your portfolio. And obviously overseas, there are more requirements now for that. So again, this is a proof of concept. This is that product that is going to take them to those next generations. Plug-in hybrids. It's going to take them into hybrids, or like they talked about, the
range extension,
range extenders. So this is not a fully baked experience yet for an EV. It's for somebody that only needs 100 miles range. And let's just cut right to that. It's not going to be for everybody. And when you look at the cost of how much this is, it's going to be a hard pill to swallow. And I don't think they're going to sell many. And I don't think they even care initially if they sell many, because they're just putting their big toe into the pond with all these other people to see how it goes and what they can learn from it.
To be clear, they will be adding a Wankel rotary gas range extender to this car in the future because this is a modular platform where they can change motors, add a gasoline engine, blah, blah, blah.
Like we said, this is not a pure EV platform. It's designed to be a front-wheel drive with an on-demand all-wheel drive system. Second, gasoline powered, and now they've modified it to add EV. But the electric motor is going to be front only.
Yes.
And that's just for packaging reasons, you know, and then they're balancing out weight by pushing the battery pack farther back to balance out the weight. So it is only front wheel drive, and that's going to be the other killer for certain people. And obviously in California, you don't care about all wheel drive per se. But I mean, we can go on. How does this thing drive, Jack? And we're kind of going to go through some corners, and you're going to listen to the jerk moment tripods and luggage in the back flying around. I'm really happy with the way this is.
Or as we careen off this canyon road.
As we drive to our death. Because it's front wheel drive, you would expect it to just annihilate the front tires like the Kias and Hyundais have. But I think really because the battery pack's in the back, it feels more balanced. And you said right away you didn't like particularly the way that the body control was. Because you felt like it was a little bit too springy, and I think what they did is they did a good job on the compression damping. There's a lot of travel going down, and then they've amped up the rebound on the return, so you get a little bit of this bounciness, but what it does is it avoids the float that you get in, like, again, I have to compare it to like the Kia Soul and some of the other products like that. It doesn't feel like a total box spring. It's really well controlled, and the turn-in's quick, and that's all the Mazda stuff that they do. So it finds a good balance of a little bit of fun to drive, and I say fun very loosely. It's just agile feeling for its size, and it does ride pretty well over all pavement types. But if you're expecting like a total couch, like the ID4 is a complete couch on wheels to a negative level, that's not this. It still does have some of the Mazda DNA in it. I just, you know, this one's a really difficult one for me to kind of, I'm talking more about it and what it is. And
to be clear, you and I both like Mazda products.
Yes.
We like that they are a brand that cares, a brand that puts a lot of effort into their product. The problem with this product is it's highly compromised.
Yeah, it's to the point where, you know, I really think they know what they're getting into. They know they're not going to sell a lot of these. And if you are somebody that is in that city-ish environment, urban area where you have access to chargers like the ChargePoint network, you're going to be okay with this because you like it. But this is not going to be a Tesla replacement. It's not going to be a Soul EV replacement or ID4.
Yeah.
You know, it's definitely not that. And I think they have another probably 5 to 6 years before you're going to see a real mainstream car that you're going to drive every day in every state, not just California. And that's where we're at. We're at the introduction. That's what this is.
So, Mark, with that, I think it's time for us to head into the final thoughts.
All right, Jack. Final thoughts on the MX-30. This is not a mainstream product. With a 100-mile range and being launched in California only, you know who this is going to appeal to. And after driving around California in this for a few hours and shooting it, I understand what it's like to be there. From going point A to point B in a regular working cycle, you're going to charge at home, you're going to charge at work, and maybe you have some miles left over to run some errands. Mazda has planned for that by giving you some ChargePoint credits for chargers and also working with local dealerships to make sure you can borrow another Mazda product, and if you need to go on a road trip, you can take that car if you need it. So this is not something that is designed for somebody that's going to be doing long trips. It just can't do that. And in our case, by the end of shooting, we had to turn off the air conditioning to make it back to the hotel. So that's life with it. And if you know that this is a starting point for the brand, this is just the starting point, you might be able to accept that. With a price point starting around $33,000 and the premium package adds another couple grand to it, about $36,000. With the federal tax credits, it might be more appealing. So what does it do well? Well, the interior space is amazing. It really is for a product of this price point. It's different, it's fresh, the materials are really interesting, and the comfort is high. The driving position's great, the electronics work surprisingly good, the audio system works well, and it just feels like a special interior space, and I think that's going to sell a lot of people. Now, drivability-wise, it feels very much like what they're trying to do with the CX-30 and Mazda 3. It just sprung differently because the weight distribution is different, with the motor being in the front, the battery pack being in the back. It feels different than a traditional front-wheel drive internal combustion engine, but it's still nimble, it still gets around well, it's quick, it turns in well, all the driving dynamics are well done. But, you know, it's an eco setup. It's torsion beam in the rear, it's strut in the front, so it's not going to wow you with like a luxury car ride. It's just quiet enough, handles well enough, and, you know, I just wish that this car was more to start, because I just hope this doesn't hurt them kind of having something that's not, again, mainstream enough and not finished enough. I think the potential is there. We're just going to have to wait probably like 3 or 4 years before we finally see this being spread out across America with a range extender. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.